One. Hello and welcome to our weekly Shiur of the Alshich commentary on the Parsha. This Parsha is Voairo, and we're getting into, of course, the dramatic, or heading towards the dramatic finale of the exodus of the Jewish people from Egypt. Let me just remind you that the Shiur every week is sponsored, or usually sponsored, for the memory of somebody who's passed away, or to celebrate a simcha, or just because somebody wants to sponsor a Shiur. This week, the Shiur is sponsored for Eli Abraham of London, who is bar mitzvah. And so to Eli, Father David, and the entire family, to his mum and to the entire family, mazel tov. And you should be a source of nachas to your family, to the Jewish people, and of course to HaShem, and last of all to yourself. So mazel tov, Eli. If you would like to sponsor the Shiur, then as usual, here's the address, yy@rabbiyyy.com, yy@rabbiyyy.com. Please be in touch, and I will be very, very happy to give a shout out, as they say over here in America, for the person you want to be mentioned. Voairo. Voairo is extraordinarily complicated. It starts at Posuk base, which is a bit of a hint that the story really is a continuation, well, naturally it is, from the previous Parsha, although every Sedra is a direct continuation. This one's certainly more than any other is in this dramatic story. I think it'd be worthwhile for us to consider exactly the two Parshas. So, of course, before I take you to the Psukim, let me just remind you that Moshe Rabbeinu, before we look inside, Moshe Rabbeinu comes back to HaShem and he says to him, Lama hari oisa la'am hazeh. Why have you done bad to the Jewish people? Now, before I turn to the Alshich, I want to explain exactly what's going on with this particularly interesting challenge. Moshe challenging God. Lama hari oisa la'am hazeh. How could you do badly to the Jewish people? It sounds, well, to put it mildly, out of character. I mean, how can you challenge God's judgment as Moshe so clearly seems to do? Well, to understand that, it might be worthwhile for us to look at a Gemara. The Gemara in Sanhedrin is discussing somebody called Micha. Now, Micha is a famous character in the history of the Jewish people, or rather, I should say, an infamous character in the history of the Jewish people. It's Micha who eventually sets up an idolatrous shrine in the land of Israel and advertises for priests to come and officiate at his idolatrous shrine. The interesting thing is that he gets two applicants straight away. And the two applicants were the grandchildren of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara, this is in the Gemara in Sanhedrin Kuf on the base. In discussing this, it's talking about Micha. Micha was not his real name. Micha is a hint to something. What was that? So let me read to you the Rashi on the side of the page here. And it says, with regards to Micha, Nismachmich bebinyan. He was crushed in the holes in the wall. Famously, this week said, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes back and challenges Hashem and says, Lama harias lama zeh, is because he sees the Jewish children, because Paro, of course, at the end of last week's Seder, makes things much worse for the Jews as a consequence of Moshe Rabbeinu doing what Hashem told him to do and going and demanding in the name of Hashem that Pharaoh lets the Jewish people go. Then they decrease the supplies that were being offered to the Jews to do the backbreaking work that they were forced to do. And any shortfall in the building of the walls, etc., the holes were filled with the bodies of the babies. Now that doesn't really make any sense because obviously the body of a baby is not going to replace, or it's not weight bearing, it's not going to fill the space properly. And I didn't quite understand that until a couple of years ago when I found on the Sefer. It wasn't a replacement, it was a punishment. They were going to die. Squished into these holes in the walls were Jewish babies. And when Moshe saw that, he was outraged. And that, to come to the end of last week's Parsha, which leads into this week's Parsha, is the challenge of Moshe Rabbeinu. Why have you done bad to the Jewish people? He's referring to these babies being pushed in. Listen to what Rashi says here, an incredible medrash. The babies were crushed in the walls of Egypt, and he says, they put the babies there in the place, actually, for a punishment for the missing bricks. As the Medrash says, I've not actually been able to find that Medrash, and sometimes Rashi is quoting Medrash that's been lost in the passage of time. Because Moshe said to Kadosh Baruch Hu, this takes us into our Parshas, Moshe said to Kadosh Baruch Hu, Atam hara'isa la'am hazeh, you have done badly for this Jewish people. Sha'achshav im ein lehem levenim, now that if they don't have a sufficient number of bricks for the work, masima b'nehem shal yisrael b'binyan, they put the babies in there. Amallah Kadosh Baruch Hu, listen to this astonishing thing. Amallah Kadosh Baruch Hu, kaitzim heim. Yeah, I know what I'm doing. And these children will grow up to be kaitzim, thorns in the flesh of the Jewish people, the ones who are being put in there. It's not, in other words, an accident, the babies who suffer this fate. It's, as it were, because it's to stop them growing up and doing terrible things to the Jewish people. Because it was obvious to me, or it's obvious to me, if these children had lived, they would grow up to do great damage and great evil. But if you want to, and if you want to, says Rashi, go and take out one of them. And so, Moshe went and took out one of them, and the one that he took out was somebody called Micha. And of course, that's the story that he goes on to do tremendous damage to the Jewish people, including, ironically, or not, maybe ironically is not the right word. I'm struggling for the word here. I'm almost going to say justifiably, but to Moshe Rabbeinu's own grandchildren. Let's pause for a second, and we'll see why I'm taking you in a slightly, we're not got to the Alshich yet shortly, because we'll see there's a connection when we do get to the Alshich. The problem really here is that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Jew who ever lived. If HaShem says, I know what I'm doing, why did he take this a stage further? Why did he take that? Like, some people say that what the Rashi is saying here in this Gemara in Sanhedrin, because that's the Rashi we're reading who quotes this Medrash. Well, Rashi, when Moshe said, why have you done evil to the Jewish people? It's not that he sees that as being evil because he's in such a high spiritual level. I mean, there's no doubts in Moshe Rabbeinu's mind with regards to what Hashem's doing as being in any way wrong. Gamzu l'toiva, to put it mildly, that's certainly his perspective. Some people explain that what Rashi is trying to say is, or what Moshe was trying to say, was how can I sell that to people who are not on the spiritual level to be able to understand that everything you do is ultimately for the best. However, there's another problem here. I'm an amoeba compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. Yet, if I was upset about something that happened, and who doesn't see in life, in our own lives, terrible things happening in Jewish communities, children dying, crib deaths or cot deaths, sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. When you see that, I mean, everybody's outraged and hurt by the death of a child. But if a heavenly voice called out and said, Yehudioni, I know you're upset about that child who passed away, but I know what I'm doing, so don't be upset, then I think I would get this. But the astonishing thing is that Hashem says, I know what I'm doing. I know that these particular children that you're getting upset about, the children being put there, it's not happenstance, it's not accidental that they are being put there. I'm making this happen. But if you want, you can save one. Now, if you said that to me, if Hashem assured me, I know what I'm doing, but if you want, you can interrupt the process and save one, I would say, sorry, sir, forgive me. If you say it's okay, it's okay. But Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay, right, I can save one, I'll save one. And he goes and does that. Now, if I had a sufficient betochen on Hashem to say, well, whatever you want, I'll do, then why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu? I think a good question, no? The answer to this can be found in the Gemara in Brachos. And the Gemara in Brachos is Daf Yud. And at the bottom of the page here in Daf Yud, there's an interesting story. And it's, if I can find the page, It's noon base. Sorry, I don't know why I turned so far along. Here is the Gemara. The Gemara tells the following story. B'yomim ahim, Daf Yud Amud Aleph, 10a. B'yomim ahim chol Chizkiyahu l'movus. The king Chizkiyahu became very, very sick once upon a time, and he was going to die. He was so sick that he was in mortal danger. And V'yova Elohi Yeshua ben Amos, and the Yeshayahu, the prophet Yeshua, came along to visit him to do Bikkur Kohanim. And V'yomer Elohi, and he said to him, Koi Amar Hashem, I have a message for you from Hashem. And what was that? Tzav l'beisecha, see to your affairs, write your will, command your family. That's the literal translation. It means attend to your affairs. Why? Because you're going to die and you're not going to live. Says the Gemara, my ki mes atavolotichie. Whether you're going to die and you're going to live, you're going to die, then obviously you're not going to live. Why does it? What's a strange formula of words? The Novi said. The answer is mes atavo elamazeh. When I say that you're going to die, it means you're going to die in this world, and you're not going to live refers to the next world. You're not going to go to Olam Haba. You're not going to go to heaven. Nor are you going to get to Olam Haba. Amalei, to which Chizkiyahu, the king, says, my kulihai, what have I done wrong that could justify such a severe punishment, death in this world and no life in the world to come? Amalei, the prophet, turned around, Yeshua turns around and says to him, because you never married, you chose not to marry. I should have translated that would be a better translation. You chose not to marry and failed, and you did it intentionally so that you would not have any children. You rejected the mitzvah of pru urevu, the fundamental Jewish mitzvah of procreation and carrying on the next generation. Omalei, to which Chizkiyahu said to Yeshua, the king said to the prophet, Mishum dechazi li beruach hakodesh, because I saw through Ruach HaKodesh, a king who's not just a king, but is in such a high spiritual level. He has Ruach HaKodesh. His decisions, his insights are informed by a spiritual level which is certainly beyond me or my understanding. And I could see that if I was to have children, that I would have children who would be no good. So that's what I saw. That was my insight, and incidentally, he was right, because he one called Menashe, Melech Israel. Very bad. To which the prophet famously retorted, said, "In the calculations of heaven, what's that to do with you? Why are you interfering with Hashem's calculations? Hashem told you to have children. What do you mean you saw? Did that in any way obviate what the Torah says? The Torah says, that's your job. Get on with it." There's an interesting postscript to this story. Because so he gives them a whole midrash there, a little bit more. And then he says, this is the jumping a little bit, he says to him, I tell you what, give me your daughter as a bride. I'll do tshuva. I'll marry her. I'll have children. Your daughter. Perhaps in combination, my zechus, a high spiritual level, I've got Ruach HaKodesh, and you are on a higher level, you're a Navi, maybe together we'll be able to have children that will avoid this fate. We'll find children who are worthy. Don't be ridiculous. I'm just telling you that they've already passed and they've already fixed in heaven. You're going to die. So you're toast, as they say. Almanei ben Omas. He said to him Ben Omas. He uses his second name, Ben Omas. Ignore your prophecy. Ignore your power to prophesy. But say, and go and forget about that. I have a tradition, a Torah tradition from my father's house. Even if a sharp sword, an executioner's sword, is laying on the neck of a person, in other words, he's just about to draw it back and execute a person, decapitate him, You should never despair and never think that the HaShem can't have rachmanis on you, have pity on you, and change the outcome. This is very interesting. Which is exactly what happens, by the way, and he does have children, and he does have Menashe Melech Yisrael. However, Menashe Melech Yisrael eventually went on to do Teshuvah. He became the quintessential Baal Teshuvah. Therefore, the challenge to Nevi'as, remember Nevi'as, the Rambam famously says that if a prophet prophesies something bad's going to happen, it may happen. Something good's going to happen, it must happen. There's a distinction, and we don't have time in this year to go into what the distinction, why there is such a distinction. However, indeed, Menashe Melech Yisrael at the end of his life did do Teshuvah. Fine. But here I think there's a very important insight, which answers our question as to why Moshe Rabbeinu, when HaShem has told him, I know what I'm doing, I know these children are going to grow up to be Rishoyim, so therefore, as it were, you're done. But he says, no, but if you want, you can save one. But if Hashem's told you that, then, you're done. That's it. What else is there to do? You've got to do what the Torah says to do. And that is, if you can save a Jewish life, you have to save a Jewish life. What the outcome of all that will be, that's Hashem's plan. This is what this story says here. That's what the Novi said to the king. The calculations of God, that's not your business. You should have married. And he gets it. He agrees. He said, okay, give me your daughter. I'll marry her. To which he says, no, but I can see prophetically, I already told you you're dead. Yeah, but it's a bad prophecy. If it's a bad prophecy, it doesn't have to come true. And therefore, maybe there's hope. And indeed, he marries her, and as we just said before, Menashe Melech Yisrael is born very bad, but becomes good in the end. But the important point is, nobody's arguing with this general principle. You keep out of the calculations of God. God's business is God's business. But your business is what the Torah says you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have children. King Hiskiah, you're supposed to save Jewish lives under all circumstances, other Jewish person. And that applies to Moshe Rabbeinu. So when Hashem says, if you want, you can save one. There's no ban. In that case, he didn't say two, he says one. Then I'll save one. Because the Torah says that there's a mitzvah of Tzolos Nefashos. The Torah says you've got to go and help somebody. I'm going to go and help somebody. No matter what the outcome is. That's up to Hashem. That's not my business. I've got to do what the Torah tells me to do. That's the story. Now, with that, I think I'll share briefly with you the screen, just to remind us what we're going to look at, and then I think I'm going to tell you, please, because you're watching this, to freeze it or get out your own Chumash so you can follow along, rather than me have this up too long on the screen. But at least we'll have a look at it, and then I'll say you can take a screenshot if you want. So just warning you, those who want to do it live when you're watching this. Or pause, but anyway, let's see what for a few seconds, exactly where we're holding in this one. So, and it is that one, I think. Yes, so here is the end of last week's Parshas Shmos. And this is when Moshe comes back. We've just been talking about this. And V'yoshev Moshe el Hashem, Moshe returns to Hashem, V'yom, and he says, Adonai. So again, V'yoshev Moshe el Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which we normally say is Adonai. V'yom Adonai, and he says Adonai. But notice, of course, it's Yud Kei Vav Kei and the name Aleph Dalet Nun Yud. Again, we pronounce both the same, but there's two different words, and there's a reason for that. We'll see it shortly. Lama Hariyas and Lama Zeh, just as we saw from the Rashi. Why have you done bad to this people? Lama Zeh, why did you send me? I mean, from the moment I came to Paro Ladaber Shmech to speak in your name. Here Lama Zeh, you've done bad to the Jewish people. And you've not, double expression, not saved the Jewish people. Your people. Hashem says to Moshe, Atasir, now you'll see. With a strong hand, I will send them out, and with a strong hand, I will take them from his land. And the Alshich is intrigued by the double expression, V'yoshev Moshe el Hashem. I just said V'yoshev Moshe V'yomer. Why is it two V'yomers? V'yoshev Moshe el Hashem, V'yomer Hashem. What's the V'yoshev? What's he returning to? Not two V'yomers. V'yoshev returns el Hashem, V'yomer Hashem. So why two Hashems and why two different names for Hashem? Okay, let's stop sharing. To understand this, we have to come to an idea which we discussed in depth in the Alshich when we looked at this in the story of the destruction of the city of Saddam. And there the Alshich quoted the famous Gemara, which the Gemara says in Shabbos, Nun He, if I remember rightly, that the Midas Hadin challenged the judgment of the Midas HaRachamim. Now, Midas HaRachamim is the name we use for Yud Hey Vav Hey. And that's why in our Pasuk, it says, V'yoshev Moshe el HaShem, and it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. What was the name of God that sent Moshe on the mission to save the Jewish people? He says, I am HaShem, Yud Hey Vav Hey. That's what it said in the story in Shmaz. This is the name of Rachamim of HaShem. Go and save the Jewish people, tell them that Hashem's going to take them out, they should stop doing Voairo Zorah and all the rest of the things that they've been doing. They should reconnect and rediscover and recover their Jewish identities. That was Hashem who sent them. But when the Torah uses the name Yud Hey Vav Hey, that's Midas HaRachamim, when it uses the word Aleph Daled Nun Yud, that's the second, and that's the one that Moshe spent. V'yomer Moshe el Hashem, and it's Adonai, with the Adon, then that's the Midas Hadin. Because this is the concept that we discussed at the time, and the Alshich repeats here, that Moshe is now addressing a very different perspective to the one we gave before, when Moshe seems to be arguing with Hashem. No. He's talking not to Hashem, the Midas HaRachamim has sent him. He's now challenging the Midas Hadin. What was the point of me being sent? If you're going to intervene, why not intervene before and stop it happening? Or if I'm being sent, at least give them a chance to do teshuvah and listen to the message that I've given them. Why should things go badly? Because from the moment I've come to Paro, things have got badly, and that's why Jewish babies are being put into the wall, etc. What's the point of all this? That's the point and this is the point that the Alshich takes up at the end, because remember that all that is a lead-in to this week's Parsha. Maybe I'll read a little bit to this. Behine, says the Alshich, he says, with this I can now explain to you what's going on here. Moshe was concerned because in this week's Sedra, then when Hashem's promises to take the Jewish people out, so repeats the promise, the Medrash and the Talmud say that it's a Shavua. He's making an oath. Why? He's making an oath because Moshe is concerned that the Midas Hadin has checked or trumped the Midas HaRachamim. Moshe is very upset that now things have got much, much worse. He thought to himself, and then what's happened is the Midas Hadin has complained. He's demanded that the court reopens the case. Are the Jewish people worthy of coming out? After all, we were supposed to be fated to be there for 400 years. We're going to get over after 210 years. 210 years means that there is a missing 190 years. Maybe the Midas Hadin has complained and said, this is not fair. Look at the sentence. Why should we let them out early, etc. So there he says, and that's upsetting Moshe. The Midas Hadin has complained that the court case will be reopened. Okay, Moshe al Hashem. That's why it says Moshe goes back to Hashem. It says V'yoshev Moshe to Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, by Yomer, but he challenges the Midas Hadin, Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That's why there's two things here. So now Moshe Rabbeinu it's not quite, why did you do this? He's doubting Hashem. The Alshich sees this totally differently. Alshich sees it from a very Kabbalistic point of view. He's now fighting with the Midas Hadin. Moshe Rabbeinu is on our side fighting with the Midas Hadin. Okay. Now, I'll share the screen again shortly for a short amount of time to this week's Parsha, and just to remind us what we're talking about there. And we'll have an insight as what the Alshich says here, which I think takes us an interesting perspective. He starts off with what is, if I was to translate it into modern terms, a Musar approach, and then he goes into a Hasidic approach. A Hasidus, remember, is a distillation of Kabbalistic ideas. Some people, incidentally, call the Alshich HaKodesh the first Hasidic Sefer, because there is And I found just recently looking at Wikipedia, because I was looking for a biography for the Alshich to send to somebody, a very brief biography, which somebody wrote there, that the Alshich rarely quotes Kabbalah. I don't know who wrote this, but I don't know what he's talking about. The Alshich quotes Kabbalah very often, very, very frequently. And therefore, because Kabbalistic ideas or distillation of Kabbalistic ideas into mainstream Jewish thought is what Chassidus is all about. That's why they call the Alshich commentary the first Hasidic sefer. Musar is more of a rational, intellectual approach to an examination of the human condition. It's not oblivious to Kabbalah, but it doesn't want to approach it or to quote it in the conveying of its message, its ethical message. And then really here we're going to see in a second the Alshich applying both, which is interesting as well. But let me share the screen again briefly and let you see exactly what the center says. Again, you can take a screenshot of this and just press, after you pause, unpause and carry on. Or you can pause altogether and just go to the comments and you can look there, but we need to know what we're talking about. So I'll share the screen with you and we'll bring this one up. And am I shared? Yes, I think. There we go. So now we come to this week's Parsha. V'yidaber Elokim el Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe, v'yamar elov ani Hashem, he says to him, ani Hashem. Ve'er el Avram, and appeared to Avram, el Yitzchak, el Yisrael, el Yaakov, and Yaakov bekel Shakai, using the name Kel Shakai. So now we get three names of Hashem. We've got the Midas Adin, which is Aleph, Dalet, and Yud. We've got Yud Kei Vavke, which is Midas Arachmim, and now we've got a different name, Bekel Shakai. To Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Hashem said the name El Kel Shakai. He didn't say the name, he didn't say to them the name Yud Kei Vavke, Midas Arachmim. V'shmoi Hashem, and my name of Hashem, Lo Nadati Lahem, I didn't make known to them, make known to them. But I did make my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, Eis Eretz Megorehem, the land of their sojourning, Asher Gorabo, which they were sojourning and wandering about in, but it was not yet theirs. The Gamani Shamati is Nakas B'nai Yisrael. Now I've heard the sufferings of the Jewish people. Okay, we can stop sharing. But that's the beginning of the Parsha. And again, notice it starts at Hosek base. We'll stop the sharing, and then you can be back. And let me read you what the Alshich says. So the Alshich is intrigued, or points, I should say, that it says v'yidaber Elokim at the beginning of the set, v'yidaber Elokim el Moshe. Now the daber is to speak harshly. So Hashem speaks harshly to Moshe at the beginning because Moshe has challenged him. And who is he challenged? As we've now explained, the Midas Adin. Elokim is Midas Adin. So he answers back, El Moshe v'yamar elov ani Hashem, and he says ani Hashem. Now I'll see what that means in a second. I'll read two questions of the Alshich. Before Hashem says what he's going to daber, it says Hashem. He says, before he says, he identifies himself, I'm Hashem. Midas Arachmim, Midas Adin. Well, we'll get to that, don't worry. And maybe question two, the Gam Shnosa is Tam of Diber Amira, and again it says, it changes the name from Hashem to Elokim, and also uses the word Diber, which is to speak harshly, and Emor, which is to speak gently. Now, well, to understand that, he says a very, very intriguing thing. The Midas Adin answers Moshe, who's challenged him, and answers and challenges him back in very harsh terms. That's what V'yidaber means. And he says, V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe Kushi, speaks to him hard. I'm reading the Rashi. Alshich hikshel adaber, because he spoke harshly. V'yamar elov ani Hashem, garamti sha'over libcha ladaber kushi negdi. You've got the chutzpah to speak harshly to me, says the Midas Adin. And I've given you great prestige and position in the Jewish people. However, kihine poi golo hu yizbarach hashkalkosa beprati pratis. But Hashem here is revealing something very important. You see, people only look at the outside, but Hashem looks into the heart. And the Alshich says here the following incredibly interesting thing. Hine, ein sofik ki berov chamlosa el am Hashem. Moshe is speaking when he says, how have you done badly to the Jewish people? Speaking to the strict side of justice, God's strict side of justice, challenging it because of his great pity and affection for the Jewish people. Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Mount Sinai later on to get the Torah, You'll probably remember that Rashi says there, "V'tacha," the Apostle says, "V'tachas raglov," and under his feet, the floor was like tiles made of sapphire. And what's the purpose of that? Rashi says, because all the time the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt, then this was there as an aid memoir. This was as a constant reminder to HaShem that the Jewish people were enslaved, his children were enslaved in Egypt, using bricks and mortar. So the sapphire bricks, which was the floor, which constituted the floor in front of Hashem's throne, was there to remind them. Now, the obvious point is clearly that you can't possibly think that Hashem needs a reminder. There are no alarm clocks in heaven. Hashem there's no time. There's nothing to forget. Hashem knows everything. So what does it mean he's being shown? And why bricks? A picture of bricks. Okay, sapphire, but bricks. To remind him of the bricks. The answer to that is, you can find this beautifully in somebody called Reb Simcha Zissel. Reb Simcha Zissel, the founder of Kelm, the altar, as they say, of Kelm. Reb Simcha Zissel says in the first few essays of his Sefer Chochmah Nusser, he talks about, if you're going to do the mitzvah of Noseh Ba'olam Chaveri, to bear somebody's pain and suffering as though it's your own, you have to picture yourself as though it's you. And interestingly, the Gemara famously talks about that if you go and visit somebody who's sick, you take away 6 days of their illness. The Gemara says, but it only happens to a certain sort of person, what's called a ben giloi. If I remember rightly, Rashi says that's a young person visiting a young person, or an old person visiting an old person, or a rich person, says the Ran, visiting a rich person, or a poor person visiting a poor person. That means there is X amount of suffering for whatever reason that has been ordained in heaven that this person should feel and go through. But if you go, and because you're a young person visiting a young person, old person visiting an old person, and so on, then automatically looking at them, you're immediately going to say to yourself the following thing: it could be me. I'm young, and he's young, and he's suffering, or she's young, and she's suffering. And I'm the same age, that could be me. Or an old person, that could be me. Or a rich person, it's the same process. And because you picture yourself as though you are the person, you see yourself as suffering and feel their suffering, then you've taken a bit of their suffering. And it's no longer there to give to them, because they've said that X amount of suffering they suffer, and they have to suffer, but now that you've taken it, they can't add on, because the judgment was X amount. They've given them X amount, just you took some of it away. But you have to be able to picture yourself as though you are the person. And Moshe Rabbeinu did this to the nth degree. First of all, he gets that message from Hashem. But before that, he goes out to see the suffering of his people as an Egyptian prince. He goes out to see them, because only if you can see somebody's suffering do you feel it as though it's yours. And not only did he see it, he schlepped the rocks and the stones that they were schlepping. An Egyptian prince, schleps with them, and he stops an Egyptian, from killing a Jew, because he feels as though he's so much part of them. And that's what the Alshich says. That the Midas Adin speaks harshly to him, because he speaks harshly to the Midas Adin. The Malachim, says the Medrash, wanted to kill Moshe Rabbeinu for this. And Hashem says, oh no, he learned it from me. He gets the idea from me. To do the mitzvah of Noseh Ba'olam Chavero, to bear somebody's pain as though it's your own, as Pirkei Avos says, is a mitzvah and something you must do. You have to picture yourself as though you are that person. He sees himself as the Jewish people. And because he sees himself as the Jewish people, he's expressing their feelings in the way that they are verbalizing it. And therefore, it's completely forgivable. And then V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe, so he speaks harshly at somebody's in his adin, V'yomer lo Ani Hashem, but then V'yomer speaks to the soft, Ani Hashem. I know what I'm doing here. I know what I'm doing. And what is it that he knows he's doing? So it's interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu said a double expression. If I turn back, it says, from the moment I came to Paro, L'daber Shvech to speak Haralam, has been worse. You've not saved them. Double expression, as I said to you before. You've not saved them. Now, in the beginning, in the middle of Shemos, when Hashem first appears to Moshe, he uses this word, V'hitzalta, but I would say so. Of course, we know there's very many expressions, different language use of expressions that Hashem uses. We refer to this in the Haggadah, of course, the Haggadah, about what he's going to do, how Ga'alti Eskem, etc. how he's going to take them out. It all refers to different aspects of the Exodus. And that takes us in from the Musar, that's the first aspect, because this little aspect of it, in order to understand somebody's pain, to another aspect of it. And that refers to the various names of HaShem. When he says, I appear to Avram as Kel Shakai, what does that mean? See, Moshe Rabbeinu was aware, and this is now we're going to Kabbalistic territory, that there is a heavenly Beis Din, or a heavenly United Nations, when each nation of the world has their own representative angels called a Sar, Shin Resh, a Sar. And this angel, as it were, personifies the wrong word, I suppose, saying we're talking about an angel, angelifies or something, the characteristic of the people that it represents. And the Gemara says no nation can fall till its angel falls first. Its ideals, what it stands for, its beliefs, it has to come crashing down as well. So therefore, in the case of the Tsar of Mitzrayim, who famously, in the Medrash says, pursued the Jewish people to Kriyas Yamsuf, arguing that it's totally unfair to save the Jews, and arguing that, okay, my people worshipped idols, but your people worshipped idols as well, because his job is to defend and to be the advocate for his people, the people he represents. So therefore, Moshe is assured by HaShem by the word V'yitzalto, that he's going to save them from the angel, the argument of the angel. There's another complaint in heaven, and it's the one I mentioned before. The Alshich goes on to say, the other complaint is that you said they were supposed to be there for 400 years. If they're going to go after 210 years, there's a deficit of 190. They're in the red of 190 years, and that's not fair. And that is another assurance that Hashem said, I'll deal with that thing as well. How did he deal with it? It's interesting, because we said, and appeared to Avram, El Yitzhak, El Yaakov, Kel Shakai, the name Kel Shakai, I'll come back to that in a second. And then he says, I didn't make that name known, but my name, Hashem, didn't make known to them. God says, but I made my covenant, my promise with them. When it says, Lahem Eretz Canaan, to give them the land of Canaan, is a Asher Megorem, but that at that time was the land of their sojournings, Asher Gorbom, where there were strangers in it. And then I've heard, because here's the important thing. Indeed, he said to Avram that your children are going to be, your nation is going to be exiled for 400 years. But I'm talking to you at a time when you're already a stranger in a land which doesn't belong to you. The clocks of the 400 years of being exiled in lands that don't belong to the Jewish people starts from that moment. That was 400 years. So don't worry about that argument in Shemayim. I'm dealing with that argument in Shemayim. And I'm dealing with the angel of Mitzrayim as well. So you've nothing to worry about. And tell that to the Jewish people. They think that I am Elohim, or Elohim, the Midas Adin, has trumped or has challenged the judgment of Hashem, the Midas Arachamim. The Pasuk says, V'yadaber Elohim al Moshe b'yoma alav ani Hashem. Elohim says, ani Hashem. That's what we say in Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Midas Arachim, Elokeinu, strict judgment, Hashem Echad. It's the same thing. And the reason why it's got worse, I know you're upset, Moshe, that it's got worse, that the Jewish babies are being put into the wall, but as Rashi said in the Gemara, and we looked at in Sanhedrin, it's all part of my calculation. I know these people are going to be bad people. So don't worry, you look at this as a terrible tragedy, and of course, you're meant to, because there's a message there. Of course, you're supposed to feel, but ultimately feel the pain of suffering of children and other people who seem, but it's all part of my plan, and I know what I'm doing. I've got this. It's all under control. And therefore, everything that's happening now is meant to be happening. Because you see, in my argument to say that they're getting out early and I can backdate it, I can also make another argument to the complaint of the Midas Adin, and that is a simple argument. Yes, indeed, they're getting out early, but this year, or last few years, or certainly the year of the Exodus, is when the bonds start to become loosened, come at the end where things got so horrible and so terrible that the Jewish people suffered so much then that I'm going to take them out early. I'm taking them out early. And you've got nothing to say because you turned up the volume or turned up the heat so much on them. That's the equivalent to the missing 190 years that you were so upset about. So I know what I'm doing. Go and tell that to the Jewish people. Ani HaShem. And don't worry. I know exactly what I'm doing with the babies. I know exactly what I'm doing with you. And the exile is going to end. I'm now making a shavua. I'm now making an oath. My promise, I'm going to keep. And in a very short space of time, within a year, the Jewish people are going to come to the Yam Suf. And at the Yam Suf, the Pasuk says, they look up and see Mitzrayim. It says they raised their eyes and saw Mitzrayim chasing after them. They raised their eyes? And Mitzrayim were chasing. What, they had an air force in those days? Yes, it was the angel of Egypt who's chasing after them. But this is after the Jewish people have cast off the avodosim, their burdens. I'll remove, as the Pasuk says, mitacha sivlos Mitzrayim, and in our parsha, I've taken from the burden of Egypt, v'hitzalta eschem me'avodosim, and I will save you from their avodah. What's their avodah? Not just the work, but the avodah zorah that the Jewish people have engaged in. You will take their God, the God of Egypt, the Mazel of Egypt. The name Keil-Shaka, which I forgot to mention, the name he used to Avram, because that Keil-Shaka is the rearranger of the Mazolos. The Mazolos we've talked about before, again, very Kabbalistic territory. Although it's mentioned in the Gemara and Shabbos and Kufna involved in other places as well, when Avram Avinu says, I can see that I'm not going to have any children. I've looked in using my powers of astrology. I've seen that the stars are arranged. And in fact, you made them, HaShem, arrange to create fates in this world. Well, my fate is that I can't have any children. I can see that. HaShem said, forget that. Say, it's get away from your astrological insights. Say, in Mazel Yisrael, Jews are not affected by Mazel. Why? Because I'm Keil Shakai. That means the rearranger of the planets. I can move the places about. You're going to have children. Of course, he has a Yitzchak. I can rearrange everything. And so the Mazel of Mitzrayim, which says the sled, because what's the sled? The sheep. The sheep, that's if you look in the astrological signs in the magazines, they're the same as ours. You can find them in the back of the Massers in Sukkot and Pesach. Then the month of Nisan, when the Jewish people go out, the Mazel, which is dominant, which affects this world, is the sled. It wasn't they worshipped sheep. That was symbolic of the koyach, the mazel, allowed them to do things. But Hashem rearranged mazel for Avram Avinu so he could have children. He rearranged the mazel of the mazolos of Egypt that it can't stop the exodus of the Jewish people. Particularly when we've done teshuvah. Particularly when we've taken the lamb, which we previously worshipped, cut its throat and eaten it. There's no greater sign of rejection of idolatry than you eat their God. So all the factors are in play here. Hashem is telling, I'll take you away from that avodah. You'll do tshuva. You will recommit to me. I'll recommit to you. You don't have to worry about the sar. I'll deal with the sar. You don't have to worry about that the Midas Adin is challenging. No, Ani HaShem. Ultimately, it's all Hashem. Things are getting bad at the moment. It's the dawn. It's the dark before the dawn. That's the insight of the Alshich at the beginning of this week's Parsha. I wish you all happy rest of the week, and of course a wonderful Shabbos. And again, don't forget, if you want to sponsor next week's Shiur, send me an email to yy@rabbiyyy.com for a side occasion, and to mark a side occasion of passing somebody, or hopefully more, for a simcha like Eli Abrams in London this particular Shabbos. Good Shabbos.